financial literacy, and the human condition. Welcome to Financial Fitness with the Money Doctor, Dr. Francis Rayam.
Hi, it's Francis. I just wanted to take a minute to thank you for watching this video. If you're catching us on YouTube, please help us help others by clicking like, subscribe, and all notifications so you don't miss any videos. And check back for the next video. I think you're going to love it. Thanks again. For more information, you can visit us at hugyourmoney.com.
Welcome to Financial Fitness. I'm Jess Tyler, along with the Money Doctor, Dr. Francis Rayam. Hi.
Hi, Jess. How are you?
I'm good. What are we talking about today?
Oh, we're talking about what to do with your money. I'm getting comments from people, what's going to happen in the market? What about these tariffs? What about the real estate market? So there's a lot of, from what my perception is, some insecurity about what's going to happen. Are things going to be more expensive? Why does this happen? What can we do about it? And I'm talking to a lot of people who are borderline depressed. Like they're saying, I'm not going to turn the news on anymore. I can't look at it. I can't think about it.
Well, it seems like it changes from day to day. Yeah, it seems like it changes day to day too.
That's exactly the problem, is that it's unnerving, right? And it is exhausting to try to keep up on it.
Right.
We typically, now I'm going to try my best not to be political here because that's not my job, but typically in generalizations, we judge presidents on their first 100 days. And we are less than 3 weeks in, or about 3 weeks in on this presidency. And people are just scrambling to figure out what's going on. Now, some people think that's great. Like, hey, there's so much stuff, the other people can't keep up. But for those of us who have to deal with it on a daily basis and try and remain informed and still go to your job and help other people and do all of those things, it's a lot to keep up on. I mean, it's like a soap opera, right? That we don't have control of.
And it's different countries with different tariffs. Then you got to kind of look up like, well, am I going to get I was seeing somebody had ordered something from China and there was like $108 fee on there. And they were like, yeah, no. So it's different countries, different amounts.
That's interesting that you're seeing that already. And the reason I wanted to talk to you about this is because you do the news. And so I knew you would have some input on it. Let's just be clear I just want to clear up the main misconception, what I think, and probably most economists think, is a main misconception. And it's that tariffs harm the companies that are producing the materials and they're not going to touch us. And that's just, dare I say it, that's just silly, okay? I mean, we are going to pay the price of those tariffs in one of two ways. If the tariffs continue to take place, the countries that those are being imposed upon will retaliate, either with passing along the higher cost of importing these things, right, to the consumer because they have to make it up somewhere, or they will put their foot down and say, we're not going to pay that. We're just going to produce less of it. And as we know about supply and demand, when you have less supply and you still have demand, what happens to prices? They go through the roof.
Up. Yeah.
So I wanted to touch on about half a dozen things that might increase substantially in prices in such a way that maybe we can, not that I'm any expert in this area, right? But that maybe we can talk about it and sort of explain to people why this might matter, what you might be able to do about it, and how this thing really works. So let's take the first of the things that I think, if tariffs continue to be imposed on, let's say, Canada and Mexico. Let's leave China out of it for just a moment, even though we import things for China for this too. Let's just take Canada and Mexico, and let's just take your morning drive to work. Okay. Cars have parts that are required in order to assemble the vehicle. Although we assemble vehicles here, even things like Kia or Hyundai, right? We're assembling them here, but those parts cross the borders to Canada and Mexico, sometimes multiple times before this car is assembled here. That means, now, if Canada sends their stuff to Mexico, they don't pay a tariff, right? But if we're in the middle, there's a tariff. So if we're importing things from Canada and we're importing things from Mexico, and both those things go into your car, you're paying two tariff price rises, right? on your car because the prices from Americans who are importing those, American car assembly manufacturers who are importing
Hmm.
those parts, have had to pay that tariff on both sides,
So
right?
they're not going to absorb that. They're going to pass it on to the customer, right?
Wouldn't you?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's business, right? So they are either going to do that or they are going to, and this isn't just cars, this is sort of the way things work along everything. You're either
Hmm.
going to say, I'm going to pay the tariff and I'm going to raise my price and pass it along to the consumer, or you're going to say, gee, I'm a little worried that consumers might not buy that, so
Hmm.
I'm not going to produce as much.
Right.
I'm not going to pay those import tariffs and I'm just going to send less there, right?
Hmm.
Cars is one of the easiest things I think for people to understand because everybody gets that, there's a lot of stuff that goes into building a car
Right.
and we're going to get it from other places. We don't manufacture everything here in the US anymore, right?
Hmm.
So we've got to get that from other places and these other places will retaliate. I think it's pretty clear to say that if you start harming their economy, they're going to have something to say about it.
And they already have. Yeah. It's just
Yeah.
going back and forth.
That's right. Yeah. So there was one thing about one of the other things that will go up in price, and we can talk more about cars and things, of course, what to do and how to shield yourself from it as best you can, right? But again, your point is a hefty one, which is we just don't know. I mean,
Hmm.
probably one of the most comforting things I'm able to say to people when they're asking me about their finances and they're saying, I just saw on the news that this is going to happen. One of the most comforting things I don't love it, but I'm able to say to them, I don't think you can rely on that right now. It
Hmm.
may change tomorrow,
I was
right?
going to say, wait 5 minutes. It'll probably change. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what is so unsettling for people is they can't catch up. They don't have any ground rules that they can rely on at the moment. Things are changing so quickly that and I can only speak to speak about the people that I've spoken with, which is, we live in a little bubble here in Massachusetts, but it's a pretty
Hmm.
good cross section. Um, and it's instilling some fear, some unrest. And that's causing people to make, or at least to call me about making more erratic financial decisions. Like
Hmm.
I got a call the other day from somebody who said, should I pay off my car? I'm so worried that something's going to happen to my car payment. Okay, putting a tariff on a car that you already own is not going to change your car payment.
Hmm.
But, if you don't have the time to make it your job to watch the news every day and read and, get caught up on everything, this is like the game of gossip. Somebody says, you know what, the price of cars is going to go up. And that
Hmm.
somehow goes to the next person who whispers in the ear and says, I heard that car payments are going up. And that goes to the
Right.
next person who calls me and
Yeah.
says, I heard that this tariff is going to raise my car. You might think that's silly, but that was a real worry for that person.
Well, a little left of center of that. So when you're thinking about something like this, would you recommend then maybe leasing instead of buying right now? Because if you have to get a car part, it's probably going to have a big tariff on it, where at least the dealer covers all that.
Well, that's an interesting question because the lease prices are based on sale prices, right?
Okay.
And your residual at the end of a lease. So this is what makes it so difficult, Jess, is
Hmm.
yes, in theory, a lease might be a good deal for you. You might want to run out right now and buy a car because you're worried about this. But I'm going to tell you that when when we're coaching people in these kinds of decisions, the important points about managing your money, the baseline, the things that you do to manage your money well, become ultra important.
Hmm.
So I'm going to go back to let's not cherry pick this, right? A term I use all the time about just pick this thing and say, I'm going to solve that problem.
Right.
Instead, go back to your roots, right? Start to think about, okay, how much do I have in savings? How can I increase what I have in savings? Can I put it somewhere safe? Can I make enough money on it? Because I don't know what's going to happen in the immediate future, but I think I might need a car,
Hmm.
right? And so could you run out now and buy a car? Yeah, if you're already in the market for it and that's what you want to do, okay, fine. Maybe you use this opportunity to get a car, but you know, we don't know what else is going to happen. So be
Right.
careful about strapping yourself in a car payment just because you got nervous
Mm-hmm.
You saw a show like this and somebody said car prices are going to go up and you got nervous. You said, I
Yeah.
better buy now, right? If you're already buying now, okay, fine. Use the same kinds of rules that we already talked to you about, which is don't overbuy, don't overpay, don't take on a car payment that's larger than you can afford, right?
Mm-hmm.
Think about lease versus buy and the reasons to do that. So I think, along with cars, we're looking at things like houses, big things like
Mm-hmm.
houses, and little things like avocados, right?
You're right.
So when you're talking about a tariff, let's just be clear about that's a duty. That's a
Mm-hmm.
tax. It's a
Yeah.
thing that increases somebody's cost, right? And that's going to have to go somewhere. So,
Mm-hmm.
talking about cars, this idea of free trade in the car world has been we've had free trade in car world where we import and export and there's no tariffs on stuff or very little since the 1990s. Now, President Trump did impose some tariffs in his first round in his presidency, but they seem to have been pulled back not long after then,
Mm-hmm.
which is something we might expect here, maybe, if history teaches us anything. It may be, and again, I'm no political strategist, right? But maybe it's a play to say, here's our power as the US, here's my power as the president. I'm going to do this unless you make a deal with me. And if you don't, then I'm going to enforce this. And if you do make a deal with me, then I won the game and I've,
Right.
pushed this into effect. It's a dangerous game. It's a really dangerous game with somebody like Canada who supplies something like 90% of the maple syrup in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And about 75% of our maple syrup here. Now, you and I are local. We know we have Vermont. We know we have, Massachusetts. We have
We used
maple
to
trees here.
we used to tap our trees in Covington, Mass. I remember that.
That's right. But we are tiny, tiny, tiny
Yeah.
compared to the amount of people that use something like maple syrup. And
Mm-hmm.
maybe maple syrup doesn't matter to you, but there are things that will matter to you, and we can talk about that in the second half as well. But I just wanted to sort of contrast, something really important like your car and something you could do without, like an avocado, but they both affect you, right? If you
Right.
love guacamole, you're going to be paying for it, or you're not going to be doing it.
And those little costs add up for sure.
They
Well,
do.
let's get your phone number if anybody has any questions.
Certainly. It's 413-773-3333.
And you can visit hugyourmoney.com anytime. We'll be back with part two of Financial Fitness with the Money Doctor, Dr. Francis Ram on WHMP.
Financial Fitness with the Money Doctor is underwritten by Franklin County Technical School. We build futures. Visit fcts.us or call 413-863-9561.
Welcome back to Financial Fitness. I'm Jess Tyler along with the Money Doctor, Dr. Francis Ram. Hi.
Hi, Jess. I'm still here, and we're still talking about money, right?
Yeah.
Still talking about tariffs and what could happen as these tariffs come into play. And I'd like to remind people that this could happen if Trump doesn't continue to put higher tariffs in place. We could irritate other countries by doing this, who then
Mm-hmm.
say, you know what? We're
We're going to
taking
do
our
that to
stuff
you.
off your shelves. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And so there are lots of things. I mean, when you're trying to play a game of chicken like this, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are lots of things you have to consider. I think those of us who are in our area where we're in a sort of a college town, right? We're in a college area, would probably um, opt to be more open to conversation, to getting things on the table before threatening somebody and trying to come to some sort of agreement. But everybody works differently and people accomplish their goals differently.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things I point to here when I say, a country could just get peeved and just say, well, you know what? You are not the only power in the world. We are a country of wonderful things, and we're not going to sell your stuff anymore. How do you like that? And that
Mm-hmm.
is exactly what was threatened in Canada recently about something near and dear to many of our hearts, which is alcohol. Not the kind you put in your car, the kind you imbibe, right? So, there was a moment there where many of the provinces, Ottawa, um, Montreal, a bunch of provinces in Canada, said, we are going to take all of the American liquor off of our shelves
Mm.
and we're not going to sell it anymore. So that was just days before they reached an agreement that a
Mm-hmm.
list, when they sent out a list, I could probably tell you who it is here. Um, yeah, Ontario, British Columbia, Manitoba, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia, right? There was a list that went out to those provinces who agreed they would pull all American booze off their shelving starting on Tuesday after whatever that was, February 3rd, 4th, 5th, something like that
Mm-hmm.
for the article. Um, so any U.S. alcohol, including beer and wine that Canadians could find, would likely see a price increase as it's on the menu for retaliatory tariffs. And that was according to an article from BBS. So, this is just the kind of thing that could happen. Um, Mexico's leader didn't seem all that pleased with this. And, we get a lot of stuff from Mexico, including those little green things I was talking about, those avocados, right? We
Mm-hmm.
get most of the avocados in the world from Mexico. Um, so, things like when we're talking about alcohol, beer, Tennessee whiskey, tequila, those are
Mm-hmm.
things, beer in particular, Modelo, which, probably isn't in our area, that's probably not the most popular beer. But in the US, number
Mm-hmm.
one beer in 2023.
Oh, wow.
Modelo. Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought that.
No, neither would I. And I might have even thought Corona would give it a heavy run for its money. But I think it surpassed, I might be wrong on this, but I think it surpassed Budweiser or something big like that in
Yeah.
2023 as the number one beer in the US. Well, guess where Modelo comes from? Comes from Mexico. Okay. So there are things like that beer or Tennessee whiskey or tequila that are argued you can't just produce those somewhere else. Where
Mm-hmm.
they're produced is the point, right? I'm getting Tennessee whiskey. It needs to be produced in Tennessee. Okay.
Right.
I'm getting tequila, which needs to be produced in Mexico, whatever. So there are lots of things about that that concern people about the tariffs on alcohol. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Now, what can you do? All right. We can argue, well, you could try to buy a car or lease a car or save your money. That's what you could do to defend yourself against car tariffs. You could say dry January gets extended for
Mm-hmm.
your beer and alcohol thing, right? You could say all these things and you could do this, but the fact of the matter is they're going to affect your life. The
Mm-hmm.
tariffs will affect your life. They are not something that just gets put on some majorly wealthy company who can absorb the cost and will, right?
Mm.
They're
Yeah.
majorly wealthy for a reason. They know how to make money and they know how to pass the cost along to American consumers. One of the things that concerns me most about this is the immediate possible rise in fuel prices, right?
Mm.
So the US doesn't have a fuel shortage, but many of the refineries here require what we call heavier fuel,
Mm-hmm.
thicker fuel,
Okay.
thicker crude oil, I should say, in order to produce the kinds of things that we need for cars and jet engines and thinner fuels like that. So we need to import that from someplace else because we don't produce that here, right? So we import, excuse me. So we import, I'm looking for the amount here. So we import 61% of oil into the US between January and November of last year came from Canada.
Mm-hmm.
61%. I think most people, if you talk about fuel, hey, we get it from the Middle East, right?
Right. Yeah, that's your
61%.
first thought.
Yeah, 61% came from Canada. Um, Canada is, in fact, America's largest foreign supplier of crude oil. So there's a wake-up call if you didn't know that. So, of course, 25% tariff would be slapped on Canada for goods with a 10% on energy, but that's 10% on your gas prices, folks, plus whatever they decide to pass along or, as we're talking about, restrict the flow of, right? So
Yeah.
there's two ways they can do this. They can pass the cost along or they can pull back the supplies. Both are going to have an effect on us, no
Mm-hmm.
matter how you slice that. So, um,
Is there any correlation between tariffs and having to worry about a recession?
well, that's a good question. A very good question. And at the risk of, trying to qualify my answer, sure. I mean, there is a point where when people don't have enough money to buy the things they need
Yeah.
and incomes are not going up in relation to that, eventually you start to look at an economic decline. And that can manifest in a number of ways, one
Hmm.
of which is we end up in some kind of a recession. Um, but I'm not here to paint doom and gloom to people because again, we could wake up tomorrow and have all this done and there could be something else new, but I can't keep track any more than anybody else can at this point. I would say I just noticed that most of our thicker crude oil that we were talking about comes from Canada and some from Mexico. So
Okay.
those two would both hit us in that case. Um, there was a quote from American fuel and petrochemical manufacturers that said many refineries need heavier crude oil to maximize flexibility of gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel production. And that's what I was talking about. You can't just make it. You need that heavier crude oil, and we have to get that from other places. Housing prices, boy, here's the next thing. Housing prices, right?
They're already terrible.
Yeah, well, they are, but we've been surviving. People have been getting loans, they've been qualifying, they've been buying houses, right? We haven't seen the market completely fall apart yet. However, what are houses made of? Well, unless you have a brick house, and even if you do, most houses have a lot of lumber in them. Now,
Hmm.
Trump says we have more lumber than we need. I would ask, why are we importing from Canada if that's the case, right? But we import a lot of lumber from Canada. And if we end up with a tariff on that, the prices of houses are going to go up astronomically again. And um, I think, people are saying that they're concerned about housing affordability if these tariffs come into play. So while we wait to see what's happening,
Hmm.
what can I say that you can do? I could say that you can watch your pennies, you know, make
The
your
pennies
budget.
are going away, Francis. The pennies are going away.
Yeah, they are. It's a conundrum, I have to say, and one that I would have personally been happy to hear more about prior to an election from both sides so that we could understand better what tariffs really are, how they work, why somebody might choose to use them or not use them, what kind of fallout are we looking at. I mean, there's just so many things going on right now, from bird flu to tariffs to, you know, more nominees in other offices. We cannot keep track of it all. And when that happens, it creates some unrest. And when unrest happens, people make foolish decisions. They make decisions from a point of fear instead of from a
Yeah.
point of knowledge. So, I was a little uncomfortable even talking about this topic because I try to stay away from politics.
No, no, no. I agree with you. This is a tough one because you don't want to be political, but also like that is like a little trigger for me when they're like, "Well, just tough it out." It's like, okay, well, you're not spending $7 on a dozen eggs or whatever it might be. It's a lot of money. Like it's a lot of money, especially when we've talked about this before. It's like supposed to allocate like only 25% to your rent or mortgage. Well, most people are doing like 50%.
Yeah.
Then you add in if gas goes up, groceries go up. Like that's not even going out money or having fun money. That's just to live.
What I do is to help people manage their money properly and to make good decisions and to understand the amount of control that they actually do have over their lives when it comes to their finances. Because most people, if you poll them, I think, would agree they have a lack of sense of control.
Yeah,
And
it's interesting too that just thinking about tariffs, I do understand what you were saying kind of in the first half of the show about, you're yielding it as power to maybe get the other side to fold. And in the meantime, the people are supposed to tough it out. But at some point, you can't tough it out anymore. At some point, you can't afford to buy the things you need. So there's a difference between being strong and trying to tough it out, and you can't put food on your table.
that's exactly right, Jess. And that's why I sucked it up and came on the air and said, okay, I'm going to talk about these tariffs, even though
Yeah,
I may make some enemies, because wealthy people, they'll pay more for their avocados. They won't care.
right.
They don't check to see if they have money in their account before they fill up their gas tank. They don't care about a grocery list before they go to the store. If they see it, they like it, they buy it. That's how that world works. But
Hmm.
for the rest of the people who are really struggling already, to talk to them about even a 10% rise on their gas prices. I mean, we're at $3 a gallon. That's $3.30 a gallon. That stuff matters, right?
Well, in
So
the day-to-day stuff, like my son went to the Big Y yesterday, and he was saying, he called me on the way home and he said, I spent $130 and I got 3 bags.
yeah,
Like, and he didn't buy a bunch of junk, but it's like for
yep,
just a small amount of stuff, $130. And you
yeah.
add in like a family of 4 or 6 or whatever, it's hard to make ends meet.
Yeah, and we aren't talking about, fancy things that you don't need. We're talking about food. We're
Right.
talking about gas that you put in your car to get to work. We're talking about the car you drive to work. And we're talking about the house you have to live in, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
that you rent. I don't care if you own or you rent. If housing prices go up, your expenses are going up,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, and when we talk about fuel, if you heat your house with oil, guess what? There's a tariff on that if that happens, right?
And
And
it's
so your fuel
already
prices
so
are going up.
high. Yeah.
Or any fuel, right?
Electricity. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, electricity, anything is, I mean, everything is so interrelated, and the country is dependent on other things,
It's
on other
interesting.
countries.
It's interesting to me too, some of the things that you were giving out today. Like, I wouldn't necessarily think a specific thing was made in Mexico or China, or a part that you might need for something that you think of as American
Right.
comes from those other countries. It'd be so neat to be able to see a list of all of the things. I bet there's so many.
It's
I'm
funny
sure
you
you
say
have
that
one.
because we didn't even talk about China, but just to give you some idea, BBC did in that article I think I mentioned, BBC did make a tiny little chart, and it was interesting. 78% of delivery trucks are imported from Mexico,
Oh, wow.
yeah, to the US, right? Um, let's see, what else? Computers, 34% from Mexico. I think everybody
Mm,
thinks that's China, right? Only 26% imported from China.
yeah, that's
Very, very
interesting.
interesting. Yeah, I think something like insulated wire. We use insulated wire in everything.
Hmm.
53% of it is imported from Mexico.
Mm, yeah.
So we're going to feel this across the board if it happens. Electric batteries, 56% from China. No surprise, right?
Hmm.
But petroleum, uh, 58% from Canada. The article I think said 61%
Yeah, that's
overall.
really interesting. I wouldn't have
I
thought
mean,
that.
yeah, so that I should give a nod to that article. It was a BBC article, and I don't remember what it was called, but if you looked up tariffs on BBC, you'd find it. And I love to read things like that. I read a number of articles that were really good, but it's a little tiny chart, but it was really good. It
Hmm.
just gives you some idea of the kinds of things we're going to pay for. Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm sure people will have questions on this because there's a lot to it. So, what is your phone number that they could get a hold of you at?
Oh, don't call me with any questions. No. You can always call me with questions. It's 413-773-3333.
You can also go to hugyourmoney.com. We'll be back next week with another edition of Financial Fitness with the Money Doctor, Dr. Francis Rand. Thank you.
Thanks, Jess. Financial Fitness with the Money Doctor is underwritten by Hug Your Money. So unique, it's patented. Financial coaching and more information at hugyourmoney.com.